Chapter 22. Arthas robbed this temple, going over and over the visions he had seen. Always before, communication from the Lich King had come only from Frostmourne. But the instant the crippling pain had struck him, Arthas had actually seen the being he served for the first time. The Lich King was alone, in the middle of a vast cavern, as imprisoned in the unnatural eyes as Frostmourne had been. But this had been no sleek covering of his form. The encased eyes had been fractured, as if someone had broken up a piece and left the jagged remains behind. Obscured by the eyes as he was, the Lich King was imperfectly glimpsed, but his voice lies in the Death Knight's mind as he cried out in torment.
Danger draws near the frozen throne. Power fading. Time is running out. You must return to Northrend immediately.
And then, piercing Arthas like a lance in the gut,
Obey.
Each time it happened, Arthas felt dazed and sick. The power that had pumped through him like adrenaline when he was merely human was receding, taking with it more than it had originally given. He was weak and vulnerable, something he had never once imagined he would be when he first grasped Frostmourne and turned away from everything he thought he believed in. His face was greasy with sweat as he laboriously mounted Invincible and rode to meet Kel'Thuzad. The Lich was waiting for him, hovering, his fluttering robes and general demeanor somehow radiating concern.
So the seizures have been getting worse?
He asked. Arthas hesitated. Should he take the Lich into his confidence? Would Kel'Thuzad attempt to wrest the power from him? No, he decided. The former necromancer had never led him astray. Always, his loyalty was to the Lich King and Arthas himself. The king nodded. It felt like his head would come off with a gesture. Yes, with my powers drained, I can barely command my own warriors. The Lich King warned me that if I didn't reach Northrend soon, all could be lost. We must depart quickly. If it was possible for Blazing empty eye sockets to exclude worry, then Kel'Thuzad did so now.
Of course, your majesty. You have not and will not be forsaken. We will depart as soon as you believe you are. There has been a change of plans, King Arthas. You are not going anywhere.
It was evidence of his weakening powers that he had not even sensed them. Arthas stared, utterly taken by surprise as the three dreadlords surrounded him.
Assassins! Cried Kel'Thuzad. It's a trap! Defend your king from those!
But the sound of a gate slamming shut drowned out the Lich's call to action. Arthas drew Frostmourne. For the first time since he had bonded with the sword. It felt heavy and almost lifeless in his hands. The runes along its blade barely gleamed at all, and it felt more like a lump of metal than a well-balanced, beautiful weapon it had always been. The undead rushed at him, and for a wild moment, Arthas was catapulted back in time to his first encounter with the walking dead. He was again standing outside a little farmhouse, assaulted by the stench of decay and almost numbed with horror as things that should have been dead attacked him. He had long since moved past any horror or repugnance at their existence. Indeed, he had come to think of them with affection. They were his subjects. He had cleansed them of life, to serve the great glory of the Lich King. It was not that they moved or fought, it was that they fought him. They were utterly under the control of dreadlords. Grimly, using all the strength he had possessed, he fought them back, a strange, sickening sensation filling him. He had never expected they would turn on him. Over the sounds of the conflict, Balnazar's voice reached Arthas, the tone gloating.
You should never have returned, human. Weakened as you are, we have assumed control over the majority of your warriors. It seems your reign was short-lived, King Arthas.
Arthas gritted his teeth, and from somewhere deep inside him dredged up more energy, more will to fight. He would not die here, but there were so many of them. So many that he had once nearly effortlessly directed and commanded, now turning implacably against him. He knew they were mindless, that they would obey whoever was the strongest, and yet somehow it hurt. He'd made them. He was growing increasingly weak, and at one point was even unable to block a blow directly to his midsection. The dull sword clanged against his armor, and he suffered no major wound, but that the ghoul had got him past his defenses alarmed him.
"There are too many of them, my king,"
Kel'Thuzad's sepulchral voice said, the tenor of loyalty in it bringing unexpected tears in Arthas's eyes.
"Flee, escape from the city. I'll find my way out and meet you in the wilderness. It is your only chance, my liege."
He knew the Lich was right. With a cry, Arthas clumsily dismounted. A wave of his hand and Invincible became insubstantial, a ghost horse instead of a skeletal one, and disappeared. Arthas would summon him again when he was safely away. He charged, gripping the enfeebled Frostmourne in both hands and swinging, no longer trying to kill or even wound his opponents. They were indeed too many, but simply to clear a path. The gates were closed, but this palace was where he had grown to manhood, and he knew it intimately. Knew every gate, wall, and hidden passageway, and instead of heading for the gates, which would have been unable to raise by himself, he went deeper into the palace. The undead followed. Arthas raced through the back corridors that had once been the private quarters of the royal family, which he had once traversed with Jaina's hand clasped tightly in his. He stumbled, and his mind reeled. How had he come to this moment, fleeing through an empty palace from his own creations, his subjects, whom he had vowed to protect? But no, he'd slain them, betrayed his subjects for the power the Lich King offered, the power that was now bleeding from him, as if from a wound that could not be closed. "Father! Jaina!" He closed his mind against the memories. Distractions would not serve him, only speed and cunning would. The narrow passageways limited the numbers of undead able to follow, and he was able to close and bolt the doors against them, delaying them. Finally, he reached his quarters and the secret exit built into the wall. He, his parents, and Kalia each had one, known only to them. Uther and the bishop, all were gone now, save he, and Arthas pushed aside the hanging tapestry to reveal a small door hidden behind it, closing and bolting it behind him. He ran, stumbling in his weakness, down the tight, twining staircase that could lead to his freedom. The door was both physically and magically disguised to look exactly like the main walls of the palace from the inside. Arthas, gasping, fumbled with the bolt and half fell out of the dim light of Tirisfal glades. The sound of battle reached his ears and he looked up, catching his breath. He blinked, confused. The undead were fighting one another. Of course, some of them were still under his command, were still his subjects. His tools, his weapons, not his subjects. He watched for a moment, leaning against the cold stone. An abomination under the control of his enemy lopped off a long-eared head and sent it flying. A shiver of disgust went through him at the sight of both sets of undead. Decomposing, maggot-ridden, shambling things. No matter who controlled them, they were foul. A glimmer caught his eye, a forlorn little ghost, hovering timidly, who had once been an adolescent girl, once been alive. He'd killed her too, directly or indirectly. His subject. She seemed still connected to the world of the living, seemed to remember what being human had once meant. He could use that. Use her. He extended his hand to the floating, spectral thing he had made out of his lust for power. I have need of your abilities, little shade, he said, pitching his voice to sound as kindly as possible. Will you help me? Her face lit up and she floated to his side. I live to serve you, King Arthas, she said, her voice still sweet despite its hollow echo. He forced himself to return her smile. It was easier when they were simply rotting flesh. But this had its advantages too. Through sheer will, he summoned more and more of them, exerting himself so hard his breath came in gasps. They came. They would serve whoever was strongest. With a roar, Arthas descended upon those who would dare stand in the way of the destiny he had bought so dearly. But even as more came to his side, so did more come to attack him. Weak, so weak he was, with only these lumps of meat to protect him. He was shaking and gasping, heaving Frostmourne about with his arms that grew increasingly weary. The earth trembled, and Arthas whirled to behold no fewer than 3 abominations lumbering toward him. Grimly he lifted Frostmourne. He, Arthas Menethil, King of Lordaeron, would not go down without a fight. Suddenly there was a flurry of motion, accompanied by anguished cries. Like the ghosts of birds, the blurs dipped and dove, harrowing the monstrosities who paused in their pursuit of Arthas to bat and roar at the spectral figures, who suddenly seemed to dive right inside the creatures. The slimy, white, maggoty things froze, and then abruptly turned their attention to the shambling ghouls that were attacking Arthas. A grin spread across the Death Knight's pale face. The banshees. He had thought Sylvanas too lost in her hatred to come to his aid, or worse, like so many of his warriors, turned to become a pawn of his enemies. But it would seem that the former Ranger General's irritation with him was spent. With the aid of the banshee-possessed abominations, the tide quickly turned, and a few moments later Arthas stood, weaving with a sudden weakness over a pile of corpses that were truly dead. The abominations turned on one another and hacked themselves to grisly bits. Arthas wondered if even their creators could have sewn back what was left of them. As they fell to the earth, the spirits that had possessed them darted free. You have my thanks, my ladies. I am glad to see that you and your mistress remain among my allies. They hovered, their voices soft and haunting. Indeed, great king. She sent us to find you. We've come to escort you across the river. Once we cross it, we'll take refuge in the wilderness. The wilderness, the same phrase Kel'Thuzad had used. Arthas relaxed even further. Clearly, his right and left hand were in agreement. He lifted a hand and concentrated. Invincible! To me! He called. A moment later, a small patch of mist appeared, swirling and taking on the shape of a skeletal horse. A heartbeat later, Invincible was there in reality. Arthas was pleased to notice that the act took little effort. Invincible loved him. This was the one thing he had done completely right. The one dead thing that could never, ever turn against him. Any more than the great animal would have done in its life. Carefully, he mounted, doing his best to hide his weakness from the banshees and the other undead. Lead me to your mistress and Kel'Thuzad, and I shall follow, he said. They did, floating away from the palace and deep into the heart of Tirisfal Glades. Arthas noticed with a sudden unease that the path they were taking led uncomfortably near the Balinir farm. Unfortunately, the banshees veered off, heading into a hillier area, and through there to a wide open field. This is the place, sisters. We'll rest here, great king. There was no sign of Sylvanas, nor of Kel'Thuzad. Arthas drew rein on Invincible, looking around. He felt a sudden prickle of apprehension. Why here? He demanded. Where is your mistress? The pain descended again and he cried out, clutching his chest. Invincible pranced beneath him, anxious, and Arthas clung on for dear life. The grey-green glade went away, replaced by the blues and whites of the oddly broken frozen throne. The Lich King's voice stabbed in his head, and Arthas bit back a whimper.
You have been deceived. Come to my side at once. Obey.
What is happening here? Arthas managed through gritted teeth. He blinked, forcing his visions to clear, and he lifted his head, grunting with the effort. She stepped out from behind the trees, carrying a bow. For a wild second, he thought he was back in Quel'Thalas, facing a living elf. But her hair was no longer golden, but black as midnight with streaks of white. Her skin was pale with bluish tinge to it, and her eyes glowed silver. It was Sylvanas, and yet it was not. For this Sylvanas was neither alive nor incorporeal. Somehow she had gotten her body back from where he had ordered it left, safely locked in an iron coffin to be used as an additional torment against her. But she had turned the tables on him. As he struggled to make sense of what was happening through the pain, Sylvanas lifted her sleek black bow, drew, and took aim, her lips curved in a smile.
You walked right into this one, Arthas.
She released the arrow. It impaled his left shoulder, piercing through his armor as if it were as flimsy as parchment, adding a fresh type of agony. He was confused for an instant. Sylvanas was a master archer. She couldn't possibly miss a fatal shot at this distance. Why the shoulder? His right hand went up automatically, but he found he couldn't even curl his fingers around the shaft. They were becoming numb, as were his feet, his legs. He flung himself onto Invincible's neck, draping and doing what he could to cling to his mount with limbs that were rapidly becoming useless. He could barely turn his head to stare at her and rasp out the words, "Traitor! What have you done to me?" She was smiling. She was happy. Slowly, languorously, she strode toward him. She was wearing the same outfit she had when he had killed her, revealing a great deal of her pale blue-white skin. Oddly though, her body bore no scars in the innumerable wounds she had received on that day.
It's a special poisoned arrow I made just for you, she said as she approached him.
She shifted the bow to her back and drew a dagger, fingering it.
The paralysis you're experiencing now is but a fraction of the agony you caused me.
Arthas swallowed. His mouth was dry as sand. "Finish me then!" She threw back her head and laughed, hollow and ghostly.
A quick death, like the one you gave me.
Her mirth faded as quickly as it had come, and her eyes flashed red. She continued her approach until she was only an arm's length away. Invincible pranced uncertainly at her proximity, and Arthas's heart lurched as he almost slipped off.
Oh no, you have taught me well, Arthas Menethil. You taught me about the folly of showing mercy to my enemies, and the delight of exacting torment from them. And so, my tutor, I'll show you how well I learned those lessons. You're going to suffer as I did. Thanks to my arrow, you can't even run.
Arthas's eyes seemed to be the only thing that could move, and he watched helplessly as she lifted the dagger.
Give my regards to Hel, you son of a bitch!
No, not this way. Not paralyzed and helpless. Jaina. Sylvanas suddenly staggered back, the pale hand that clutched the dagger twisting and opening. The look on her face was utter astonishment. A heartbeat later, the little shade that had come to Arthas's aid earlier materialized, smiling happily at the thought that she had helped to save her king. Happy to serve.
Back, you mindless one! You shall not fall today, my king!
Kel'Thuzad! He had come as he had promised, finding Arthas all the way out here where the traitorous banshee had lured him, And he had not come alone. Well over a dozen undead were with him, and they now launched themselves at Sylvanas and her banshees. Hope rose inside him, but it was still paralyzed, still unable to move. He watched as the fight raged around him. In a few moments it was obvious that Sylvanas would need to retreat. She shot him a look, and again her eyes flashed red.
"This isn't over, Arthas. I'll never stop hunting you."
Arthas was looking directly at her as she seemed to melt into the shadows. The last parts of her to vanish were her crimson eyes. With her mistress gone, the other banshees under Sylvanas' command disappeared as well. Kel'Thuzad hastened to Arthas' side.
"Did she harm you, my liege?"
Arthas could only stare at him, the paralysis so far gone he could not even move his lips. Bony hands folded with surprisingly delicacy around the arrow and tugged. Arthas bit back a cry of pain as the arrow came free. His red blood was mixed with a gooey black substance, which Kel'Thuzad examined carefully.
"The effects of her arrow will wear off in time. It seems the poison was meant only to immobilize you."
Of course, Arthas thought. Otherwise she would not have needed the dagger. Relief shuddered through him, leaving him even more exhausted. He had come very close, too close, to his death. If not for the loyalty of the Lich, the elf would have had him. He tried again to speak and managed. You saved me." Kel'Thuzad inclined his horned head.
"I am grateful I could be of assistance, my king. But you must hasten from this place to Northrend. All the preparations for your journey have been made. What is it you will have of me?"
Kel'Thuzad had been right. Even now, Arthas was beginning to feel some semblance of life returning to his limbs, though not enough that he could move under his own power. "I need to find the Lich King as soon as possible. Much longer, and I don't know what the future holds, or if I'll even return, but I want you to watch over this land. See to it that my legacy endures." He trusted the Lich, not out of affection or loyalty, but simply as a cold, hard fact. Kel'Thuzad was an undead thing, bound to the master they both served. Arthas' eyes flittered to the little ghost, hovering, smiling a few feet away, and to the slack-faced, rotting corpses who would have walked off a cliff if he had told them to. Just dead meat and sundered spirits, not subjects, and they never had been, no matter what the little shade smile said.
"You honor me, my liege. I shall do as you ask, King Arthas. I shall."
She had a body now, what her own had once been, though changed, as she had been changed. Sylvanas walked with the same easy stride she had in life, wore the same armor, but it was not the same. She was forever, irrevocably altered.
"You seem troubled, mistress."
Sylvanas started from her reverie and turned to the Banshee, one of the many who floated beside her. She could float with them, but she preferred the heaviness, the solidity of the corporal form she had stolen back for herself.
"Aren't you, sister?" she answered curtly. "Only days ago, we were the Lich King's slaves. We existed only to slaughter in his name, and now we are free." "I don't understand, mistress."
The Banshee's voice was hollow and confused.
"Our wills are our own now. Is that not what you fought for? I thought you'd be overjoyed."
Sylvanas laughed, aware that it was perilously close to hysteria.
"What joy is there in this curse? We are still undead, sister. Still monstrosities."
She extended a hand, examined the blue-gray flesh, noticed the cold that clung to her like a second skin.
"What are we if not slaves to this torment?" He had taken so much. Even if she extended his death over a period of days, weeks, she would never be able to make Arthas suffer sufficiently. His death would not bring back the dead, cleanse the Sunwell, nor restore her to her living, peach and gold self. But it would feel very good. He had eluded her at their confrontation several days past. His lackey, the Lich, had come at precisely the wrong moment. Arthas had gone far beyond her grasp now, trying to heal himself. She had learned that he'd left Kel'Thuzad in control of these plagued lands. But that was all right. She was dead. She had all the time in the world to plot an exquisite revenge. A movement caught her eye and she got gracefully to her feet, drawing the bow and knocking it in one single swift movement. The swirling portal opened and Varimathra stood there, grinning patronizingly down at her.
Greetings, Lady Sylvanas.
The demon actually bowed. Sylvanas raised an eyebrow. She did not for a minute think he meant it.
My brothers and I appreciate the role you played in overthrowing Arthas.
The role she played? Like this was some sort of theatrical game. Overthrow! I suppose one could call it that. He was carried away, that much is sure. The mighty being shrugged, his wings spreading slightly with a gesture.
Either way, he no longer troubles us. I've come to offer you a formal invitation to join our new order.
A new order? Not very new at all, she mused. Same subjugation, different master. She could not have been less interested. Varimathras, she said coldly. She did not bow in return. My only interest was in seeing Arthas dead. Since I failed in my first attempt at this goal, I now wish to concentrate my efforts on succeeding the next time. I have no time for your petty politics or power-mongering. The demon bridled.
Careful, my lady. It would be unwise to incur our wrath. We are the future of these plague lands. You can either join us and rule, or be cast aside.
You? The future? Kel'Thuzad did not go with his precious Arthas. He was left here for a reason. But perhaps a Lich reborn by the very essence of the mighty Sunwell is nothing to beings as powerful as you. Her voice dripped scorn, and the Dreadlord frowned terribly. I've lived as a slave long enough, Dreadlord. Funny how one used the word lived, even though she was dead. Old habits died hard, it would seem. I have fought tooth and nail to become more than that bastard made me. I have my own will now, and I choose my own path. The Legion is defeated. You are the last pathetic remnants. You are a dying breed. I won't relinquish my freedom by shackling myself to you fools.
So be it.
Varimathras hissed. He was furious.
Our reply will come soon.
He teleported out, his face twisted in a scowl. Her needling hand got into him, and he fairly quivered with outrage. She noted this dispassionately. He was easy to anger. He was the one they had sent to her, thinking her no great threat. She would need more than a handful of banshees to fight Arthas. She would need an army, a city of the dead. She would need Lordaeron. The Forsaken, she would call these lost souls who, like her, did not breathe, but who yet had their own will. And even more immediately, she would need more than her spectral sisters to fight the three demonic brothers. Or maybe there would be only two she needed to fight. Sylvanas Windrunner thought again of Varimathras, how easy he was manipulated. Perhaps this one could be useful. Yes, she and the Forsaken would find their own path in this world. I would slaughter anyone who stood in their way.